It was a rainy night when Kyle Harper's life changed forever. The kind of storm that made the night seem endless, with dark clouds hanging so low they threatened to swallow the world. Kyle had just turned 16, but his life had always been full of twists. Nothing ever seemed normal to him. He had always felt like there was something off, an unseen weight pressing on him wherever he went. But on this particular night, he would come face to face with something far worse than anything he'd ever imagined. Kyle had just moved to the small, seemingly peaceful town of Pine Hollow. His family had relocated for his father's new job, and Kyle, shy, awkward, and always the outsider, hadn't made many friends. Most kids at school were either indifferent or too busy to care about the new kid, and Kyle didn't mind. He'd never been the popular type. It was around midnight when he first noticed something strange. He was sitting in his room, headphones, blasting music to drown out the sound of the storm, when he heard a soft whisper. At first he thought it was just the wind rattling the windows, but the whisper was too distinct. His name was in the sound. Kyle. It came again, louder this time. He took off his headphones, feeling a shiver run down his spine. His room was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He glanced around, but everything was as it should be. His posters on the walls, his desk cluttered with homework, the old lamp on his nightstand casting long shadows across the room. But then, he saw it. A shadow in the corner, darker than the rest of the room, as though it were alive. It wasn't just the shadow of a chair or the lamp. No, this shadow had shape, movement. Kyle. The voice came again, and this time, it was unmistakably coming. From the corner, his heart hammered in his chest. Who's there? He stammered, his voice trembling. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. Then the shadow seemed to move, slithering toward him, like ink spilling across the floor. Kyle's breath hitched as the shadow took form, rising from the corner into a tall, twisted figure. It was a man, if you could even call it that. The figure was impossibly tall, its skin a sickly pale gray, its eyes two black voids that seemed to devour the light. It had no mouth, but Kyle could feel the voice inside his head, louder now, invasive. "You're mine now," it whispered, its voice both in the room and inside his mind. Kyle tried to scream, but no sound came. His body froze, his legs refusing to move as the figure moved closer, its long, clawed fingers reaching for him. The world around him seemed to distort, the air growing thick, suffocating. The room began to spin, and Kyle felt as though he were sinking into the floor. His vision blurred as the figure loomed over him. "You will become my vessel," it whispered. "You will be mine." The next morning, Kyle woke up in his bed, drenched in sweat, his heart still pounding. The storm had stopped, and the sun was peeking through the clouds. It was a typical morning, except everything felt wrong. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like something was lingering just out of sight. Kyle stumbled out of bed, his mind still foggy from the nightmare, or whatever it had been. He tried to shake it off. It had to be a dream. Just a dream. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw it. His eyes were darker than usual, almost black, and his reflection seemed to move differently from his body. It felt as if his own reflection was mocking him, twisting into a grin that wasn't his. He gasped and backed away from the mirror, but the face in the glass lingered. His reflection blinked at him slowly, and then its mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. Kyle's chest tightened. Something was wrong. Over the next few days, things began to spiral out of control. Kyle started hearing voices, whispers, murmurs that called his name in the dead of night. They urged him to do things he couldn't explain. It was as if something was clawing at the edges of his mind, slowly taking over. He became withdrawn, shutting himself off from his parents and friends. His once peaceful room now felt like a prison. The shadow from the corner of his room had returned, growing stronger, feeding on his fear. It would slink around the edges of his vision, only to disappear when he turned to look. But Kyle knew it was there. One evening, he sat on the floor of his room, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. His pupils were black, nearly swallowed whole, and his once pale skin now seemed to have a sickly, grayish tint. He could feel it. It was inside him, the demon, the entity that had claimed him. It was feeding off his fear, using his body as a vessel to break free. The whispers grew louder in his mind. Kill them. Kill them all. He was losing control. He tried to fight it, but it was futile. The voice of the demon had become too strong, too commanding. It was like a parasite, digging deeper into his soul, taking hold of his willpower. His hands trembled as he stood up, eyes wide with fear, yet feeling an overwhelming pull toward his parents' bedroom. "No, I won't," Kyle whispered, but the demon's voice was louder. "Yes, you will." That night, when his parents went to bed, Kyle sat motionless in his room. The urge to obey the demon was nearly overwhelming, but part of him, the real Kyle, fought desperately to hold on. The demon had promised him freedom in exchange for his soul, but Kyle couldn't give up. Not yet. He glanced around his room, eyes landing on the family photo on his nightstand. He saw his mother and father, smiling, happy. They were his anchor. But the demon's voice was already creeping in, worming its way into his thoughts. Kill them. But just as he stood up, ready to do something, anything, to break free from this nightmare, the door to his room slammed open. His mother stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes filled with concern. "Kyle?" she whispered, her voice trembling. And then she saw it, the darkness in his eyes, the way his posture had changed, the way his smile was so wrong. It wasn't her son standing in front of her. It was something else. "Mom, please, stay back," Kyle pleaded, his voice cracking. "I don't want to hurt you." The demon laughed, a low, guttural sound that made Kyle's blood run cold. It took over his voice, and he spoke in a tone that was no longer his own. "Come closer," the demon growled. "I want to show you something beautiful." The darkness in Kyle's eyes spread like a disease, wrapping around his mind. He could feel it. He was losing the fight. The demon was winning. But then, something unexpected happened. His mother stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, as if unsure of what to do. She raised her hand to his face, her fingers trembling as she brushed his cheek. "Kyle," she whispered, softly. "I know you're in there. You have to fight it. Please, fight." For a moment, there was a flicker of something in Kyle's eyes, a brief glimpse of the boy who had once been full of life, who had laughed and played. That part of him still existed, buried deep beneath the demon's control, and with that spark of hope, Kyle screamed, the sound raw and desperate. It felt like every bone in his body was being pulled apart, but in the darkness, in that final moment of clarity, he fought back. The next morning, when Kyle woke up, the demon was gone. He could still feel its presence lurking in the back of his mind, but for now, it was silent. His mother was by his side, her hand resting gently on his arm. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes told him everything. He was lucky to be alive, but Kyle knew one thing: this wasn't over. The demon might have left for now, but it would be back. And when it did, Kyle would be ready. He had survived the first battle, but the war was far from over. The shadows would always be waiting. The days following the terrifying night of the demon's first assault on Kyle's mind were a blur. He couldn't fully remember what had happened. Only flashes of images, whispers in his ears, and that terrible, suffocating darkness that had seemed to overtake him. His mother, who had somehow reached him in that moment of clarity, insisted that he go see a therapist. But Kyle knew that what he had experienced wasn't a product of his imagination. It wasn't some fleeting nightmare. Something had taken hold of him, and he could feel it, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for its next chance to claim him completely. It was the second night after his mother's intervention that things began to spiral again. Kyle had hoped that the demon had gone, that whatever had been inside him had somehow lost its grip. But as the sun sank beneath the horizon, the weight of the house grew heavier. The darkness felt wrong, like it was swallowing the light. Kyle's room, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The shadows in the corners had become more pronounced, more oppressive. The cold in the air clung to his skin, his breath visible in the stillness of his room. His mind felt foggy, as though something was pushing him toward a precipice. Suddenly, he heard it again, the whisper. "Kyle, it's time." The voice was faint, but unmistakable. It was no longer coming from the corners of the room, no longer a shadow. It was in his head. And this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a growl, like a hungry animal sniffing its prey. "Come closer, Kyle. You belong to me." Kyle stood up, his legs weak beneath him. He reached for the lamp on his nightstand and flicked it on, but the light did nothing to chase away the encroaching darkness. His heart pounded, but he couldn't tear himself away from the voice that beckoned him. It was all-consuming, overpowering. He clenched his fists, trying to resist, but the demon's influence was like a poison in his veins, urging him to obey, to embrace it. His body trembled as the darkness around him grew thicker, the air colder, and the walls seemed to close in. But then, just as before, his mother's voice called to him from outside the door. "Kyle, are you okay in there?" Her voice was soft, filled with concern. For a brief moment, Kyle felt a surge of clarity, as if his own mind broke through the fog. He staggered toward the door, his hand trembling on the doorknob, but the voice of the demon tore through him, demanding his attention. "No," the demon hissed, its voice now an unbearable cacophony in his skull. "You belong to me. You cannot leave." Kyle slammed his hand against the door, forcing himself to turn the knob. "Mom, help!" His voice cracked, desperation rising. But before he could open the door, the dark presence seized him. It felt like icy fingers digging into his chest, dragging him back into the shadows of his room. The demon's grip on his mind tightened. His thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. "Kyle," the voice whispered again, this time with a dark promise. "You are mine. Forever." With a shriek of pure terror, Kyle felt the cold darkness consume him, felt the weight of the demon's will sinking into his soul. His body jerked violently as he collapsed to the floor, his face contorting in agony. When he woke up, Kyle was no longer in his room. The walls around him were covered in moss and rot, and the air smelled damp and decayed. He struggled to sit up, confusion clouding his senses. The last thing he remembered was the darkness pulling him in, the demon's voice echoing in his mind. "Kyle," the voice. It was unmistakable, though it wasn't in his head anymore. It surrounded him, vibrating through the walls. His heart pounded as he turned, desperately searching for the source. He was in a basement, a dark, cold place with low ceilings and exposed pipes. A single flickering light bulb hung above him, casting long shadows that twisted and moved. "You are finally awake." The figure that emerged from the shadows was the same twisted man-like shape Kyle had seen before. The demon, its body shifting, constantly changing. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light as it stepped forward, its claws scraping against the concrete floor. "Why did you bring me here?" Kyle's voice trembled. his body fighting against the sensation of losing control. "Because, Kyle, this is where you belong. This is where you will become one with me. You will serve me," the demon hissed. "No!" Kyle shouted, struggling to stand, but his limbs felt weak. The cold air was oppressive, and every movement was sluggish, as if something was pulling him down. The demon smirked, its hollow eyes narrowing. "You have no power over me. You are nothing, just a vessel I will use to break free." Kyle tried to summon every ounce of strength within him. He wasn't going to let this thing win, not like before. He refused to be its puppet again. But as he reached into himself, searching for something to push the darkness away, the demon whispered again, a cold, venomous voice that gripped his mind. "You cannot escape me. I am in your blood, in your bones. You are mine, boy." His body suddenly felt heavy, his legs giving way as if invisible chains had wrapped around him. Kyle collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, the demon's presence filling every corner of his mind. But there was something else, something buried deep within him that screamed, fought to survive. He closed his eyes, focusing all his willpower. In that moment, his mother's face flashed before him, her loving smile, her gentle touch. It was that memory, that love, that gave him the strength to fight. His family, his friends, the life he had before, all of it flooded his mind. "No," he whispered, through clenched teeth. "You won't take me." The demon laughed, its form flickering as if unsure of how to respond to his defiance. But Kyle wasn't finished yet. He clenched his fists, feeling a surge of energy he hadn't known he had. With a roar of defiance, Kyle forced himself to stand, his body shaking but determined. The light above flickered violently, as if reacting to his anger, to his fight. The room around him trembled. "You can't control me anymore," Kyle growled, his voice deepening as he began to speak with an authority he didn't fully understand. The demon recoiled, its form shifting violently. "You are a child," it spat. "You are weak." But Kyle didn't listen. He focused on the power within himself, the anger, the fear, the desperation. He screamed, releasing it all at once, like a torrent of pure emotion, and the air around him crackled with energy. The demon shrieked, its form dissolving, breaking apart. The power of Kyle's will crushed it, forcing it to retreat back into the darkness where it belonged. For the first time in days, the basement fell silent. Kyle collapsed to the ground, panting, his body drained from the fight. But the demon was gone, at least for now. The room around him seemed less oppressive, less alive. The weight lifted from his chest, and Kyle realized he had won, for now. But as the final remnants of the demon's influence faded, Kyle knew this wasn't over. The creature was still there, somewhere, and it would return. He would need to be stronger. He would need to keep fighting, and no matter what, he couldn't let it take him again.